Testing 1, 2, 3. Let's get this audio sorted out before we get going. Okay, so we're a little bit later than we normally are today. There's a bit of a delay. There's a lot of craziness going on with OBS. So what we're going to do is we'll leave it going for another 10 minutes or so, just so everyone can get in, and then we'll kickstart. Okay, one more test of the audio to make sure everything's working fine. There's been a bit of nuts going on with this microphone today, so hopefully this sounds a little bit better. Alright, welcome to the Aspect History stream. It's the 21st of February 2019. Today, we're going to be doing a rewatch of the first 13 episodes of our Mythical Creatures Bestiary. So we're going to be going from the enfields all the way up to, I believe, the dullahans. And the way this is going to work is I'll be stopping off after every video and providing some extra information that I didn't provide in the original videos, just so that there is a point to this. And if you have any questions in the meantime, when I stop off, I will do my best to answer that. If I don't answer your question straight away, then what will happen is that either A, I'll be trying to look up a more accurate answer than what's just off the top of my head, or B, I haven't had time to think up an answer because the question's been asked too close to the end of the video. So if you ask a question, I will answer it eventually. So feel free to just keep asking as we're watching, essentially. Like I say, I'll be stopping off after every video, and hopefully you'll learn something new that you didn't learn before from the original videos. I've done my best to try and include some interesting information for each one. Sometimes the videos have been very, very detailed already, so they don't always delve into the mythical creatures directly, but they always revolve around subjects that are related to those mythical creatures. So this should be about maybe an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours long, and what we'll do first of all is we'll wait 5 minutes or so for more people to get in, and I guess I'll just answer any questions you guys have before we get started. We'll give it another couple of minutes to let anybody else that's going to come in, and then we'll kickstart on the first video. Like I just said, if you just missed that bit, I'll be stopping off from time to time to include more information about stuff that wasn't in the original videos. So hopefully you'll learn something new, then a little bit more than we did when we did the Dante stream. The Dante stream was kind of just a rewatch all the way through. I'm hoping that this one provides a little bit more extra information than what we did last time. Alright, I think we should just get cracking. We're going to start off with enfields. Like I said, we're going to go from enfields all the way down to dullahan. So something that might happen is you might see the quality increase dramatically from the first video to the last. Sorry about that. You know, these are quite early videos we're looking at. Hopefully the next time we do Mythical Creatures Rewatch, maybe from episodes 14 to 26, there will be a steady incline of quality. But for now, the first episode, I am as sorry as I can be. The first episode is about enfields, so let's get going. Hey, I'm Circle Strafe, and welcome to my Mythical Creatures Bestiary. In this episode, we're going to talk about a lesser-known creature, the enfield. The enfield is a mythological chimera from Ireland, and possibly England. As a chimera, it's built from different parts of other animals. The Journal of the Kilkenny and South East of Ireland Archaeological Society describes it as having the head of a fox, the body and forelegs of an eagle, and the hind and rear legs of a wolf. The journal describes these parts as indicating that he, by whom it was born, was reputed to possess the subtlety and cunning of the first-named beast, the magnitude and fortitude, with honour, labour, diligence, and great matters, of the eagle, and the fierceness of the wolf. Some representations and interpretations convey an enfield sporting a lion body with the chest of a greyhound. In this case, the only eagle segment is the four legs. The lion in this regard conveys royalty and strength, where the greyhound presents the traits of swiftness and endurance. Enfields are greatly used on the crest of the O'Kelly clan in Ireland, and it is to this clan that the creature is perhaps most closely associated. At its earliest appearance, the Enfield shows up in a 1392 genealogical document referencing the O'Kellys. The creature also appears on grave markings for the clan, and tomb seals stretching back many centuries. The best example I could find for the purpose of the creature is within the Tribes and Customs of Emeny by John O'Donovan. O'Donovan says, "There is a tradition of the O'Kellys of Emeny, that they have borne their crest an Enfield since the time of this Teig Moor, from the belief that this fabulous animal issues at the sea of the Battle of Clontarf to protect the body of O'Kelly from the Danes until rescued by his followers." Celtic peoples believed in giving their dead a proper funeral. They both buried and cremated the remains of their fallen loved ones. They highly respected the corpses of those that they were related to, and especially those of their leaders. They believed that proper final action on the bodies will allow the spirits of the dead to rest peacefully. This devotion to protecting the dead created a problem. At the time, there were a lot of wars. This was between tribes, between clans. Their devotion to final rites gave the enemy a unique tactic. Opposing groups would work to capture dead bodies where they could, especially those of leaders. Disgracing the corpses and tearing them apart was intensely distressing and demoralizing to the troops. They believed the spirits of those lost would be forced to walk the earth eternally until completely avenged. This is where the idea of the Enfield seems to come in. The Enfields are primarily seen as guardians of chieftains and leaders that were slain in battle. After the leader falls, an Enfield is said to appear by the dead body's side. This creature would stand over the corpse and protect it from enemies seeking to treat it with disrespect. As an extra, I mentioned at the beginning that Enfields appear in both Ireland and possibly England. The reason that Enfields could also come to play in England is that there is actually a place in England called Enfield. The reason this is important is that the origin of Enfield's name goes even further back than that of the O'Kelly clan's documented examples, all the way back to the Roman conquest of Britain in fact. There's a variant on the word written as Enfeld, which appears in the English Domesday Book of 1086. Translated into modern English from that place name, Enna would mean either the given name, Enna, or the word for lamb, En. Feld basically means field. So pretty much either Enna's field, or field where lambs are raised. The name has flowed into common usage as a surname within England, most likely based on the place rather than the creature. Whatever the source, the Enfield Chimera is quite an interesting lesser-known creature. It's an obscure cultural relic of a belief system long past. It represents, at the time, a reliable guardian for an ancient people at war. Hey, thanks for watching this episode. This was actually the first of a number of videos on mythical creatures that I intend to produce. Please like, share and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned as I add to this bestiary. If there's any obscure or interesting creatures you want me to cover in this series, throw me a comment and I'll add it to the list. Join me in the next video of this series, where we go over the shady monster of Alaska, Canada and Greenland, the qalupalik. Toodles. Okay, so Enfield information's pretty hard to come by. It's about as much as I could get has been put into that video, but there is some extra information I can provide about Teig Moor. So in the image that you can see here, this is the Battle of Clontarf. And Teig Moor was a chieftain, and he was a close ally of a guy called Brian Borrow. And Brian Borrow was was an Irish high king who was famous for fighting off a Viking invasion. I did a mini post about it on YouTube actually in the community tab, but I'll go over that again here because it's quite an interesting story. So the Battle of Clontarf took place in 1014 beside the River Tolka in Ireland, and the belligerents were the forces following Ireland's High King, Brian Borrow, and a coalition of Viking, Irish and Scottish forces. Around about 10,000 men lost their lives in the fight, including Brian Borrow and his eldest son and heir. This is really important because the result of the battle created a succession crisis for the throne in Ireland. Brian Borrow's two younger sons eventually came to odds over that succession crisis. It means that in Ireland there was no undisputed High King for many years after the fighting. But the thing that came out of it was that Ireland crushed the Vikings. They demolished them, and it was such a massive blow to Viking domination that the Vikings basically retreated from Ireland, and Brian Boru became basically a national hero. So that was Enfields. The next video is the qalupalik.
Strafe, and welcome to my Mythical Creatures Bestiary. Today we're going to talk about the ominous, antagonistic character of Inuit mythology, the qalupalik. The qalupalik is, from most accounts, humanoid in appearance. It's said that it has green skin, overgrown wet hair, and abnormally long fingernails. On the qalupalik's back is an enormous satchel-like hood called an amoti. This hood is a traditional carrying pouch which Inuit women used to hold their children, much like carrying a backpack. Johannes Nicolaisen, in his book named Folk, also describes the qalupalik as follows. His body is that of a human being, and he wears clothes made of eider duck skins. Therefore, he is sometimes called mythiling, or with eider ducks. The qalupalik lives in the oceans of the Arctic Circle and preys on children. It hunts around fishing boats and the shores of villages and waits for a child to fall into its trap. The myth of the creature is common among Inuit peoples. It generally follows the story of a disobedient child that has either strayed too far from home or greatly misbehaved. When the child is near a patch of water, the qalupalik hums to draw it in, and when it's finally within reach, the qalupalik rises up and snatches the child for itself. It places its victim in its hood pouch, resubmerges, and the child is never seen again. What it actually does with its victim is varied. Some stories say that the qalupalik simply eats the child, in which case the creature is also described to be ever hungry. Another interpretation states it puts the child to sleep, stores it away, and then feeds on its energy to stay young. In more unnerving tales, the qalupalik wants to raise the child for its own. One of the more popular tales sees the qalupalik hunted ceaselessly by a father of a boy it took. Out of fear of discovery, the creature releases the child, and the boy grows up to be a model citizen, never again stepping out of line or doing anything forbidden. The myth is clearly a cautionary tale to keep children behaving. It's an antagonistic punishment that parents warn their children about to stop them doing something stupid and dangerous. After all, these tribes live within the Arctic tundras, and one misstep might actually turn out to be fatal. Frederick B. Lorgrand, in his book Inuit Shamanism, interestingly talks about how the tale of the qalupalik can greatly affect Inuit people well into their adult years. Some truly believe that these things really exist. First off, he talks about an account of an elderly woman. She gave a child to qalupalik after a failed hunt, and then regretted her action when the hunt was successful the next time around. Lorgrand also quotes a tribesman who spoke about when qalupalik once approached the tribe's camp at night. The tribesman said, "Nobody saw it, but the dogs were so scared they got on top of the kamak. The people started wondering if it was a qalupalik. My brother saw the tail of an amorti made of eider duck skin. He saw the qalupalik running very close to us." It's surprising how closely this tale matches up with other mythical creatures designed to scare children into obedience. The bogeyman or the American boogeyman is utilised in an almost identical way. The tales around its origin are, in fairness, unique, but its purpose is absolutely the same. That's it, thanks for watching. If you like this video, go and check out the others in this series. Check out the channel on Facebook and Twitter to stay up to date, and consider checking out my Patreon page, where there's extra content and other perks. I'll see you in the next video. Toodles!
Okay, so the next one along was the qalupalik. Here's the image. Qalupalik are kind of like a blending between mermaids, which are like half human, half sea creatures, dark spirits, and kappa, which are like water demons. The first video I ever got on this this video actually was from a woman named Sharon Dwyer, and she said that she actually grew up in Arctic Canada and was very closely related to these kinds of stories. She grew up as a child hearing these stories about the qalupalik, and she said that when she was a child, her and others were afraid of the ocean because of the qalupalik, and this pretty much confirms their role as a cautionary tale for kids, not to do something like dangerous and stupid. One thing I didn't mention in the video is how lightning fast qalupalik are supposed to be. So when they jump out of the water to catch their prey, when they reach out to grab children, you can only see them for a short instant before they've done their deed and they're gone again. Which is why they're kind of even more terrifying, because you don't know if you're just going to blink and you're gone, kind of thing. So it just makes them even more mysterious, I guess, and even more difficult to comprehend. So you always fear something that you don't understand, and if something's that fast, you don't understand how it can be that fast. So it will make it a little bit more unnerving, a little bit more like uncanny. So the next video is draugar.
Hey, I'm Circlestrafe, and welcome to my Mythical Creatures Bestiary. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the unsettling undead beings of Norse mythology, the draugar. Draugar are malevolent Norse creatures. They are ancient representations of revenants or zombies. They go by many names, including Agenwalkers, Draugar, Draug, and Aptaganga. Intelligent creatures, draugar are the rotting corpses of those who have died, reanimated by the unstoppable will of the souls of the deceased. They are often described as jet black or dark blue in colour, and strong beyond the reckoning of any regular man. Any evil, greedy or brutish person may become a draugar. It is said that their spirits refuse to follow the prescribed path of death and the afterlife. Even then, however, it takes an extraordinary power of will for a person to force one's spirit back into their body, making draugar fairly rare. The beings supposedly have a wide array of magical abilities. These include transmutation into various animals, and passing through walls and other solid matter. They also have a magical stare, which can drive men insane by simply looking at it. Related to this, any animals grazing nearby a draugar turn mad by the evil and power that the creature exudes. One of their more famous abilities is to increase their size at will. This greatly enhances their strength and weight and makes them very formidable opponents. Norse peoples mostly buried their dead. Despite modern depictions popularising the idea of a floating cremation, burial was actually the most common method utilised. The graves that Vikings created were kind of like houses. They were mounds, filled with things that Viking people believed a dead man may need for a short while. The mounds would have things like food and drink, personal treasure, and sometimes even slaves that were buried alive with the dead. The Zombies book by Nick Redfern and Brad Steiger states the following. As for the means by which these menacing creatures ensured their survival, it was in classic zombie style. Both the draugar and the hagbui dined on human flesh. The hagbui are similar revenant-themed monsters in Norse mythology. Draugar are said to dwell chiefly in their burial mounds, guarding great treasures that they were laid to rest with or had obtained over years of hunting for flesh. Draugar appear like wisps of smoke when they leave their graves, and they have a stench of rot and death. As reanimated dead, draugar can experience a unique second death. The only way to kill a draugar, in fact, is to wrestle it back into its grave, dismember it, cremate it, and then finally throw its ashes into the sea. Problematically, any victims of draugar absorb the curse and rise themselves as draugar after death. For this reason, hunting one is a severely dangerous prospect. Not only are draugar immensely strong and hard to kill, but their curse is also passed on to any victims that fail. Due to the menace that people believed draugar to be, traditions started to appear that were believed to ward them off and prevent them from coming into being. First off, people learned to recognise a potential draugar by the body's activity upon death. For instance, If the body is sitting upright instead of lying flat, they are likely experiencing a draugar transformation. Next, to try to prevent a body from returning as a draugar, Vikings would do a number of very peculiar things. First of all, with the body on display in the family home, they would cover it with a pair of opened up scissors and place twigs in its clothing. The deceased's big toes were bound together. Large, strong nails were driven through their feet to stop them from rising up and wandering about. Finally, the body was smothered in a shroud to keep it securely tied up. There were some very obscure rituals that occurred after this. Vikings would move the coffin randomly in 3 directions when carrying the body out of the house to be buried. This was said to confuse a draugar's sense of direction. Interestingly, Norse peoples believed that a draugar could only return to a home and bring death to it by entering through the door that it exited as a corpse. Instead of the inconvenience of having to barricade their front door forever, people would open up coffin-sized holes in their walls and slide the coffin through it. This was done feet first to stop the draugar from knowing where it was going. The hole was then walled up immediately afterwards, protecting the home. What if those unique last rites were not given or were unable to be given? One unique case for this is related to men who drowned on one of the Vikings' many sea voyages. In this circumstance, the Vikings believed that the spirit of the man drowned becomes a very special class of draugar. Waterborne draugars look like regular draugars, but their heads are misshapen into Cthulhu-esque nightmares. They wear oilskins instead of clothing, and they're able to hunt on the seas using wooden rafts that they build for themselves. These draugars are masters of camouflage. They pretend to be seaweed on beached rocks until an unexpected passerby becomes their lunch. That's it, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, why not check out some of the other mythical creatures in this bestiary? Like, subscribe and comment to let me know what you thought of the video. You can keep up to date with the channel on Facebook and Twitter. Consider checking out my Patreon page for more content and other perks. I'll see you in the next video. Toodles!
So that was the draugar. Let's go into qalupalik. Here's a nice image, piece of artwork. So, a plot point that this video kind of glosses over, and I've been asked quite a few times about actually, is why dead Viking bodies were then covered in a pair of scissors. Like, what was the symbolism of that? Why was that a thing? The commonly held belief in antiquity was that cold iron, or just generally iron, was able to repel, trap, or hurt supernatural creatures. So, the purpose of iron with the draugar would be to, in this case, repel, trap, or hurt it. But Vikings were quite practical people as well, and they often put items that the dead person needed in the grave with them. You know, the video talks about how they put in stuff like food and gold, and sometimes even like slaves, live slaves, to serve them in death. And say, Viking people were quite practical, and they kind of killed 2 birds with 1 stone with the scissors thing. So they would want to be able to give the dead person scissors so they could do something like trim their beard or cut their hair. And these items were usually made out of iron. So why would you use a separate piece of iron to do the exact same thing? I mean, iron was probably quite difficult to come by in those days. So it was more of a utilizing one thing for multiple purposes. Just an extra for draugar as well. In Norse societies, there was a very particular person called a Volga, and this was basically a female prophet. And some sagas actually talk about draugar mastering the ability to see the past and the future, much like Volva. So that's something to consider as well. Especially in the case of, it talks about how fighting a draugar is a difficult proposition. Imagine fighting a draugar that is infinitely strong, that turns you into a draugar if you lose, that can also predict your every move. Just something to think about. The next video is Medusa.
Welcome to the Mythical Creatures Bestiary. Today, we're going to be talking about the most famous gorgon of them all, Medusa. Medusa is a unique chimera from Greek mythology. As a gorgon, Medusa has a very specific combination of traits. She's humanoid for the most part, but she has snakes instead of hair and large wings on her back. Her most famous trait is her unendingly hideous looks, said to be so terrifying that they turn men to stone. There's a number of fairly diverse origin stories for this character, and we'll go over a couple of these now. Classically speaking, Medusa was seen as one of three sisters, all with similar traits. In this interpretation, she was the daughter of the god Phorcys and his sister Ceto. She was born as this horrific half-snake creature that she's come to be known as. In contradiction to this, a lot of ancient Greek art depicts Medusa and her sisters as serpentine monsters born of the gods Echidna and Typhon. These gods are colloquially known as the mother and father of Greek monsters. Echidna is seen as a half-serpent, half-human deity, known to have birthed many other similar creatures. As an example, she gave birth to the three-headed dog Cerberus and the Greek chimera of Lycia. A later interpretation of Medusa is that she was once an incredibly beautiful maiden. Poseidon took advantage of that beauty and assaulted Medusa inside of Athena's temple. Cassandra Earson, in her book Fabulous Creatures, Mythical Monsters and Animal Power Symbols, describes what happened next. She says, "In revenge against Medusa, not Poseidon, for the defilement of the temple, Athena changed Medusa's golden hair into hideous yellow serpents." Whatever the case of Medusa's origins, one element to her story is always relatively the same: how she died. She is an antagonist in the tale of Perseus. As much of the mythology of Medusa revolves around this particular tale, we'll go over the cliff notes of that tale now. King Polydectes wanted Perseus out of the picture so he could take advantage of Perseus' mother. The king hatched a scheme to shame Perseus into getting what he wanted. Under the guise of a high-profile marriage, Polydectes ordered everyone in the kingdom to bring him gifts. He knew that Perseus was way too poor to bring anything substantial. The king used this as an excuse to order Perseus to retrieve a gorgon's head for him. He fully expected that Perseus would die in the attempt. Eventually Perseus was led to and was provided tools by Greek gods. These included a mirrored shield from Athena, a sword from Hephaestus, a helmet of invisibility from Hades, and the winged sandals of Hermes. Medusa was the only gorgon that was mortal, so she was the gorgon that Perseus targeted. Perseus approached the cave where Medusa and her sisters were sleeping. Using his mirrored shield and his godly sword, he sliced off Medusa's head and put it in a sack. The other two gorgons tried to chase him around the cave, but his other godly tools let him make a swift and invisible exit. In the tale where Poseidon had defiled Medusa, from the decapitation sprung the offspring of that embrace. Out of her neck emerged Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, the man with the golden sword. Chrysaor went on to father other creatures like Geryon, and quite interestingly, Echidna. Echidna, as we recall, was the mother of Medusa in some versions of the tale. Perseus travelled back home and found that his mother had been abused by the king. He discovered that she was forced to take refuge within a temple. Enraged, Perseus moved to meet King Polydectes, who was incredibly shocked to see Perseus still alive. The king asked if Perseus had brought what he originally wanted, and Perseus confirmed. He lifted up Medusa's head and turned to the king to stone. In one version of the tale, whilst travelling back to the king, Perseus used Medusa's head to turn Atlas to stone near Africa when Atlas tried to attack him. droplets of Medusa's blood spilled onto the ground and turned into the vipers and snakes of Africa. Other droplets fell into the sea, forming the stone-like coral reefs of the oceans. According to the ancient poet Hesiod, Medusa's cave was said to be located on the island of Sarpedon, close to the Greek island of Lesbos. This island is a non-existing mythical location. This concept was common within Greek myth, with other examples including the islands of Aea, Erythea, and the islands of the Blessed. A lot of tales tell of Medusa being born in the sea, explaining her island home and why many of her ancestral origins utilize ocean-based deities. After his quest, Perseus gave Medusa's head to Athena. The goddess then placed the head on her shield, the Aegis. One of the snakes from Medusa's head shows up in a later Greek tale of Heracles, with its powers to turn people to stone still intact. Athena gifts the snake to the heroic figure so that he may save a town with it. Medusa's tale has been fairly uniquely long-lasting for a Greek myth. She appears in numerous pieces of artwork and stories in different cultures throughout history. Her detached head appears in cameos of Roman tales as a protective symbol. Alexander the Great depicted her visage on his own breastplate whilst attempting to conquer the world. In Christian Europe, millennia after the original story, Dante Alighieri utilised her in his Inferno as a threat that could halt his journey. That's it, thanks for watching. Thanks for liking and all the positive feedback so far. It really helps to support the channel. Consider checking out the Patreon if you want to support the channel further. If you're new to this series or new to the channel, click here to watch another video where we cover the Norse revenants, the draugar. Or click here to see another series we're doing about Dante's Inferno. And we'll see you in the next video. Toodles!
Okay, so a common comment that came out of that video was people asking how Perseus didn't turn to stone when he was faced with Medusa. And a few of you probably know the answer to this already, but the video probably doesn't make it clear enough for people that aren't familiar with the story, so I'll just go over that for a second. So Perseus received a mirrored shield from Athena, part of his godly gifts, essentially. And that mirrored shield acted as kind of a filter for Perseus. So Perseus looked into it and saw Medusa's reflection and used her reflection in order to kill her, basically. And so he didn't have to look at her directly. He basically looked in the shield, walked backwards, and then lopped her head off. The two other Gorgons were called Stheno and Euryale. And Stheno's name means strong, and Euryale's means wide leaping or kind of wide journeyed, basically. Medusa's name means guardian or protectress, which kind of indicates that she's the leader of the group. It also indicates that the Gorgons were named based on physical traits. Stheno was obviously the strong, but it also kind of represented what she did as well. So Stheno was said to have killed the most humans of all of the three Gorgons. With Euryale, she had a loud screeching cry, so she was far-reaching, essentially. And supposedly, actually, Athena tried to replicate her cry by inventing the flute. So there's a random bit of trivia for you. I'm not entirely sure what happened to Medusa's sisters. The stories kind of end that they are immortal and they couldn't find Perseus. But it's probable that, if these stories are true, they would probably still be alive today. So you've got that as well. The next video is about Bake-kujira, a Japanese mythical creature.
Welcome to Aspect History. Welcome to the Mythical Creatures Bestiary. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the eerie monster of Western Japanese mythology, the Bake-kujira. The Bake-kujira, or ghost whale, is a sea creature in traditional Japanese folklore. The beasts are represented as antagonistic and accursed entities, full of vengeance and anger. The Bake-kujira, consisting of all bone and no flesh, entice hunters in by floating towards the top of the water. They bob on the surface at night and in the rain as if they're rising up for breath. The hazy environment masks much of their supernatural aspects from the shore, making them seem like enormous living white whales. Hunters excitedly wade out into the water and attack the Bake-kujira, but every attempt to harpoon it fails. This is until realization sets in that they are launching weapons at reanimated bone. Something quite unique about a Bake-kujira is its nightmarish entourage. As it floats, schools and flocks of haunting-looking birds and fish follow it around. Tales talk about how these other beasts are unnatural and unsettling to look at. After the villagers have tried to hunt the Bake-kujira, it drifts quickly towards the horizon, followed by its strange party of monsters. The Bake-kujira has by this point inflicted the hunters with terrible curses, and it disappears from sight. The hunters unknowingly carry those curses to their villagers, which then pollute those places with pestilence, badly infectious diseases, fires, and other disasters. The stories directly link some of those disasters with the diseases obtained from beached rotting whales. Back when this story was told, whales were a massive resource for oil, bone, meat and more in Japan. A famous saying actually went, "There's nothing to throw away from a whale except its voice." Whale resources went a long way for a long time. However, whaling was mostly passive, with hunting focused on whales that had already beached themselves or were stranded in shallow water. The effect of killing a whale was sometimes seen as a divine intervention because of how drastically it benefited everybody nearby. A whale could easily save a village from starvation and eventually ruin. The whales were celebrated as blessings and became seen as deific godly figures in the water. Even some shrines named Kujira Jinja were created in their honour. The Bake-kujira represented to these early Japanese whalers the antithesis of what a regular whale did. Whilst real whales were exciting lifts of prosperity and health for a village, the Bake-kujira were bearers of misery, disaster and disease. That's it, thanks for watching. A huge thank you to every single one of our subscribers for helping us to reach the 1000 subscriber milestone. Your support means so much to us. If you're new to this series or new to this channel, click here to check out another series we're doing about Dante's Inferno, or click here to see us cover the mythical Gorgon, Medusa. And we'll see you in the next video. Toodles!
Okay, so with Bake-kujira, that means ghost whale. And sometimes the Bake-kujira were also called the Hone-kujira, which means bone whale. So it's good to have that kind of vocabulary in there because you can find information about one and you can find information about the other, but they don't always line up. So it's good to know that there's also a different name for it, I guess. The ghost whale is one of the bakemono, and I can't remember if that was actually in the video or not, but bakemono are essentially supernatural Japanese creatures. And I've got a quote here from Teresa Bain, and it's from her Encyclopedia of Spirits and Ghosts in World Mythology, talking about what bakemono are. So I'm just going to kind of churn through that. So you've got variations, which are obake or obakemono. They're supernatural creatures from Japanese folk tales, folklore and mythology. The bakemono, or a changed thing, have an array of evil powers, such as deception, being eaters of human flesh, or they themselves are not necessarily evil. Female bakemono are exceptionally creepy, turning beauty and seduction into unadulterated horror, while male bakemono are just naturally terrifying. Nearly all bakemono were once humans, who, after their death, were transformed into a hideous physical manifestation of their nature. All bakemono have the ability to become invisible and visible at will, and can also change the solidity of their substance and mass or have none at all. So this kind of gives the impression that Bake-kujira were once humans. There is a video that we're going to be covering later on, which goes over Oni, and the quotes that I found about the classification of Oni suggest that Bakemono doesn't just cover transformations of people, but also transformations of animals, which is where the Bake-kujira comes in. The next video that we're going to be going over is St. George and the Dragon, and this one's voiced over by Steel Stash, so expect a different voice.
Hey, I'm Steel Stash, and welcome to AspectHistory. Welcome to our new series about dragon myths. If you're not already aware, we've been running this series for a while now about mythical creatures. There's really no creature that is as widely known as a dragon. Dragons have lots of stories, a lot of origins, and a lot of different looks and abilities. This new series is going to cover stories involving famous dragons in history. In today's episode, we're going to kick off this series by covering the story of St. George and the Dragon. It's quite an old tale, and there are a lot of versions. We're specifically going to be using the Golden Legend interpretation of the tale by Jacobus de Voragine. Let's begin. In a town named Selene in Libya is a terrible plague of misery. The source of this misery is not a disease, a pestilence, or even a war. The source is a venom-spewing dragon. The dragon lives beside a lake near Selene, tainting it. Every time it approaches the town, it poisons the people with its hellish breath. The dragon is a hungry, deadly, and evil beast. To prevent the dragon from afflicting the town with its terrible presence, the townsfolk begin to appease it with food. To start with, they send 2 sheep a day to the dragon to keep it docile and away from their homes. However, the town begins to run low on stocks of sheep. The people begin sending 1 sheep and 1 man a day to keep the beast at bay. Again, for a time, this is enough. But the attrition slowly eats away at the men of the town, and another solution is needed. The people of Selene come to an accord, after deliberating, to start feeding their children and young to the dragon. The victims are selected by a lottery. The caveat of this lottery is that any young person, rich or poor, healthy or sick, should they be called upon, must give themselves to the ravenous beast. One day, the lottery draws the name of the king's daughter. The king is full of sorrow and grief and begs the townfolk to spare her a gruesome death. The townsfolk refuse, citing the terms of their accord. The king bribes them with gold and jewels, and the townsfolk still say no to him. They become angry with the king. Their children have been butchered to keep him safe, and now his daughter will do the same for them, or else they will burn his house down. The king begins to cry in anguish. He says to his daughter that he will never see her married. He dresses his daughter in a wedding dress and directs her to the dragon's lair. On her journey to meet the disgusting dragon, the princess happens across St. George trotting on his horse nearby. St. George asks her why she is crying. She replies, telling him to flee lest he perishes as well. St. George is insistent on answers, and the princess explains her fate to the noble knight. The devout man of God says that he will help her in the name of Jesus Christ. Just as they finish speaking, the dragon leaps out from its hiding spot and lunges towards the pair. St. George gallops at the dragon and pierces it with his spear. He severely injures the beast with his strike. St. George confidently tells the princess to wrap her belt around the dragon's neck, and she does so terrified. Miraculously, the wounded dragon becomes tamed under her leash. St. George leads both the princess and the beast back to Selene. The townsfolk recoil in horror at the sight of the dragon. They yell in fear and scream as it passes by. The procession stops in the middle of town, and St. George steps up to speak to the gathering townfolk. The knight informs the citizens of Selene that he will kill the dragon if only they baptize themselves in the name of God. Eager to see the end of the dragon, a great flood of baptisms immediately begins throughout Selene. Thousands of men and women and children line up hurriedly to be ordained under Christian doctrines. Within a matter of days, the entire town has been through the process. St. George beheads the dragon to the cheers of the townsfolk. Its remains are so big that 4 ox carts have to work together to carry the carcass of the savage beast away. For his bravery, strength, and the rescue of the princess, the king offers countless amounts of gold to St. George. The knight refuses. He simply replies to the king to manage, honor, and support the church and those that teach the Christian faith to others. St. George leaves Selene, savior of Libya. That's it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for liking and subscribing to the channel. Your support really means a lot to us. You can keep up to date with the channel on Facebook, Twitter, and Discord. If you're new to the channel, why not check out some of the other videos listed here? And we'll see you in the next video. Toodles!
Alright, so that was Steel Stash's interpretation of St. George of the Dragon. There's a couple of extra things actually to put on top of that. Probably not related to the actual tale itself, but more St. George. I've included dragon myths, by the way, because dragons are still technically mythical creatures, so it's a good way to pad it out. Okay, so whilst our tale talks about St. George in Libya, the original tale probably comes from Cappadocia, which is in modern-day Turkey. And the tale exploded to Libya around the 12th century and exploded out pretty much all across Europe with men fighting in the Crusades. There was actually a commonly held belief by many of the knights and fighters in the Crusades that St. George had actually fought with them in various battles and was key to their victory. They would swear on their lives that they've seen St. George, especially in the fights of Antioch and Jerusalem. As well as this, St. George is known for his red cross, and the cross of St. George was actually applied after he got famous. So it eventually became the symbol of the Knights Templar, and by association was de facto applied to him. But the cross itself actually comes from the cross of St. Ambrose, which is from Milan. And the city of Milan still uses the cross of St. Ambrose as their city flag. What this means is that Milan's flag bears a striking resemblance to the national flag of England, because England adopted the cross of St. George, which was based on the cross of St. Ambrose, and because he's the patron saint of England, that is the flag of England. So the city of Milan and the national flag of England are pretty much identical. The next video along is Genies.
Medusa, and welcome to Aspect History. In today's episode, we're going to be covering the supernatural demon spirits common to Islamic theology, the Genie. Genies, or jinn, have roots in many cultures throughout history. They appear in stories from Sierra Leone and Africa as spirits that possess people. They show up in Roman stories as the masculine spiritual equivalents of Juno. In this rundown, we're going to be looking at the more common classical version of the creature as documented in the Islamic faith, the jinn. A quick narrator's note on my research into pronunciations for this episode. There are several variations of the spelling of genie depending on which culture you're drawing from. While many people seem to pronounce the variations a little differently, the most authoritative sources I could find broke it down into two main sounds, jinn and genie. If you have sources for other pronunciations, please let us know in the comments so we can make sure we have all the facts. The Quran states that after the creation of the world, and before Adam came to be, Allah created the jinn, a species formed from smokeless fire. The jinn are seen as beings of formlessness, able to live inside all inanimate things and hidden from the senses of ordinary humans. On occasion, they can make themselves whole and visible in any form they wish, but are mostly separated from us. Jinn exist outside of our physical realm, but share a number of similar traits to humans. Firstly, they require food and water to survive. They need to procreate to continue on existing, and eventually, after a long, long time, they die. Even after death, their spirits are subjected to salvation or punishment in the Islamic faith, depending on the kind of life they led. They live in complex societies like our own, with males and females, young and old, believers and non-believers, and are subjected to the same religious dogma. Jinn are, however, strong. They're also very fast, and due to their formlessness, they are free from all regular physical limitations. It's a commonly held belief that jinn are analogous to demons. Jinn have the free will to choose not to obey their god, and with this comes the desire and freedom to make choices, just like with people. The demon analogy comes into play specifically here, as those choices are normally seen as evil, untrustworthy, and oppressive. It is important to point out, however, that in practice, jinn can actually be good or evil. It's entirely situational. Jinn are common in Arabian tales. Perhaps most famously, they show up in 1001 Nights. This compendium of stories includes multiple representations from the jinn. Here are some examples of them from that book. The Genie of the Lamp and the Genie of the Ring, from Aladdin and the Wonderful Lamp. The genie imprisoned in a jar in The Fisherman and the Genie. The Jinn Princess in The Tale of Kamar al-Zaman. There are a few very distinct classes of jinn. We'll cover just 3 of these now. Marid, the genie that Westerners are commonly aware of. These beings are the barrel-chested, powerful creatures that can be compelled to perform deeds for a master. In some stories, they are also capable of granting wishes when imprisoned. Ifrit, tribal jinn that are mostly infernal and likely to lean towards more evil deeds. They are cunning beings that dwell beneath the earth and are hard to control. It is said that King Solomon was given authority over these jinn by Allah. Solomon used the power to command them to build the first temple. Thirdly, we have the ghoul. These jinn are said to be predatory beings that hide in human forms and prey on the flesh of victims. Ghouls are explicitly demonic in nature and are incapable of benevolence. Some prophets in Islam are shared between jinn and humans. Muhammad, for instance, was sent as a prophet to both communities, and there are passages in the Quran which deal with him interacting with jinn directly. Here is one example of Muhammad's dealings with the jinn. In Muhammad's words, "Every one of you has been assigned a companion from the jinn. The companions asked, 'Even you, O Messenger of God?' And the Prophet replied, 'Even me, except that God has helped me against him, and he has become a Muslim. Now he only tells me to do good.'" In that passage, you can see the free nature of the jinn and how they had the choice to follow Islam or not. Also in the Quran are angels. They exist here as genderless followers of Allah, without the free will to disobey him. Angels are forged of light, where jinn are forged of fire. In the Islamic faith, the Satan role is taken up by a being named Iblis. An interesting note is that, while there's no complete agreement on the root of the name Iblis, many historians theorize that it was drawn from the Greek name for Satan, Diablos. One tale states that Iblis was an angel forged from fire instead of light. Another tale states that Iblis is a jinn that was elevated to paradise for his great piety of Allah. In both versions of the story, Iblis was cast out from paradise for refusing to bow before Adam. As a regular angel cannot possibly refuse the orders of Allah, the common assertion is that Iblis, the devil of the Islamic faith, is a jinn. Well, that's it for today's episode. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe to show us your support. You can keep up to date with the channel on Facebook, Twitter, and Discord, where you can find news, updates, or even just chat around with us. If you're new to the series, or new to the channel, why not check out some of the other videos linked right here. We'll see you in the next video. Toodles!
Alright, that was Matt Sommer, by the way, that voiced over that one. Here's some more genie facts, I guess. So, genies often take the forms of snakes or dogs, or other creatures that terrify humans. And that's because they're mischievous, and they find joy in human misery. One thing that was left out of that video as well is that genies often take the form of ghosts and the spirits of dead people, as the spirits of dead people, and they trick living people into thinking that their loved ones have come back from the grave to visit them. And in the Islamic faith, once you've passed on, you basically never return. So spirits in Islam are almost always attributed to mischievous genies. Whilst it looks like genies are superior to humans in some regards, they're stronger, they're bigger, they have the ability to transform, they can look into our universe, but we can't look into theirs. They actually have equal or lesser intelligence than people do. And that's part of the reason why in the story, Iblis was asked to bow before Adam, because of the intelligence of humans. Okay, so the next video along, we've got Selkies. Let's jump right in with that one.
Hey, I'm Circle Strafe, and welcome to Aspect History. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the shape-shifting aquatic mere creatures from Scottish folklore, the Selkie. Selkie are sea-dwelling beings, whose stories primarily come from the islands of Orkney and Shetland, or the Northern Isles of Scotland. They are creatures of two forms, human and seal. In the book Folk Tales of Water Spirits, the word Selkie is explained. The book states, in Orkney, Selkie was a popular name for seal. Seals were divided into two classes, namely the first, the common seal, which had no power to assume human form. To the other class belonged all seals greater in size than Phoca vitulina, such as the great seal, rough seal, Greenland seal, crested seal, and grey seal. And it was this class of seals that were called the Selkie folk, because they had the power to assume human form. Selkie are interesting, almost tragic beings. Stories generally tell that, through some arbitrary rules that change from depiction to depiction, they appear on the shore, they shed their seal form, and become human. The most common tales are those of beautiful Selkie women. On the shore, sailors happen across their shedded seal skin, and either through trickery, theft, or simple ignorance, steal those skins away. These sailors then discover the beautiful Selkie in their human form, naked and pure. The sailors are totally enamored by their beauty. Because the Selkie are confined to the shore, imprisoned in human form, they are irrationally compelled to marry the sailor that found them. Unlike many beautiful oceanic mythical creatures, the Selkie are fairly unique in that they are quite gentle beings. They lack a need for violence, and are usually the tragic victims in the tales they appear in. The sailors that have married the innocent Selkie sometimes know nothing of the true origins of their wives, settling down with these women, having children, and generally living regular lives. All the while, the Selkie longs more than anything to return to the sea, to their home. They stare longingly at the shore for many hours, drawn to the waters. On some moonlit nights, they dance melancholically on the water's edge. The tales end in heartbreak for the sailor and his children, with the Selkie one day discovering its lost seal skin. They morph back into it, go to the ocean, and are never seen again. Children of Selkie are generally distinguishable by having webbed feet and strange toes made of horned material. In some versions of the tale, once a year, the children of the Selkie are greeted happily by a large seal, said to be their long-lost mothers. There are stories of male Selkie as well. Unlike the females, the males are said to be amorous and magically seductive beings. They are supposedly irresistible to women. Male Selkies cast off their sealskins to wade on land searching out unsatisfied women with whom they can have an extramarital affair with. Women can also go to the shore and cry 7 tears into the sea. This action would draw the Selkie male in. The idea of male Selkie could have been used as a potential explanation and excuse for wives running away or sleeping with attractive young men. There's another creature that is sometimes confused with the Selkie called the Finfolk. Finfolk are another aquatic species from the island of Orkney, which are more antagonistic and violent. These creatures kidnap men and women, drag them into the sea, and then force them to become their lifelong spouses. In situations where women cry into the sea to draw in a male Selkie, there is always the inherent risk that a Finfolk will be drawn in instead. There are parallels of Selkie in many other traditions and cultures. The Irish mermaids, for instance, are mentioned as being seal-like by Thomas Crofton Croker in the fairy legends and traditions of the south of Ireland. Croker says, "The husband immediately returned, learned the discovery had taken place and ran to overtake his wife, but only arrived in time to see her transformation of shape completed. To see her in the form of a seal, bounding from the ledge of a rock into the sea." That's it, thanks for watching. Thanks for liking and subscribing up until now. Check us out on Facebook and Discord to stay up to date with the latest happenings. If you're new to this channel or new to this video series, check out some of our other content linked right here, and we'll see you in the next video. Toodles!
Alright, so gonna be quite a little bit of a longer separation here. I quite like that video actually. I quite like the editing on that one. It gets a lot of feels. People have a lot of feels in the comments. Anyway, so Selkie are very, very, very similar to mermaids, and we've got a mermaids video coming up actually that if you're watching this after the fact is probably already available to you because it's coming out tomorrow. They're very much like mermaids except they're docile and they want companionship and love over kind of strife and murder. There's quite a lot of contention as to how often Selkies can transform. So in the video it glosses over a little bit the arbitrary rules for Selkie to come on shore, and some tales say that they can only do it say once a year, usually on Midsummer's Eve, and some tales say it has to be every 9 nights, for example. And there's another one that says every seventh stream, whatever that means. So these arbitrary rules are kind of, I believe that they're kind of regional and they're story specific. But yeah, when you're kind of researching your own about Selkies, it's always good to be aware that Selkies kind of have different rules. They're very similar to mermaids, very, very similar to Irish mermaids, and they have their own kind of sets of rules depending on the story you're reading. What I want to do now is actually I want to just read you a section of a book that I've got here called The Book of Beasties, and it's by a woman called Belle Robertson. And it's basically a paragraph of text, and then there's a kind of a little poem-ish thing at the end. On a visit to North Uist in the Outer Hebrides, I came across the tale of the MacCodrums. Many years ago, a fisherman named MacCodrum stole a seal skin and married a Selkie. They were happily married with children, but the Selkie wife always longed for the sea. Many years later, her daughter discovered her sealskin locked in a carved chest. In an instant, her mother, clutching her skin, fled to the beach. She left her family for the sea, but always returned when the moon was at bay to swim with her babes in the waves. Descendants of this family became known as the MacCodrums of the Seals. If a woman sheds 7 tears of loneliness into the sea, a male Selkie lover shall she find. And then at the bottom it says, with moonlight I hear the music of the sea, and I need to dance. I smell the salt, and I long to be with my ain folk, swimming in these dark cold waves. The longing rocks me, a Selkie I will always be. The water in my heart, the waves in my soul. MacCodrum. Okay, so the next video we've got is Oni. So these are the Japanese creatures that I was talking about earlier on in this stream.
In some of the oldest tales of Japan, there exists a myth of evil creatures. They have persisted throughout the centuries to embed themselves in classical folklore, books, proverbs, and even modern media. But what are these dark beings? And where do they come from? In today's video, we're going to be going over the Oni. Oni are the famous demons or ogres of Japan. They sit in the class of Japanese creatures called yokai, or mysterious calamities. They are the entities of cruelty and punishment that exist in one of the many Buddhist hells. There's quite a few variants on what Oni actually look like, but generally they're depicted as blue or red in colour, with a head of messy hair encircling a number of very sharp horns. In their mouths they have long, deadly tusks, and on their hands their fingertips are emblazoned with nightmarish claws. If that wasn't enough, it's common for some Oni to be given strange and unsettling traits to up their scare factor. These special cases are portrayed with an unnatural number of eyes, or fingers or toes. Oni are enormous in size, standing taller than the tallest man can ever be. They are immensely strong, and they're ferocious beyond equal. It's common for Oni to be masters of sorcery as well, making them practically impossible to defeat. These evil beings wear pelts of deadly beasts as loincloths, and carry massive iron clubs named kanabo. A famous saying in Japan goes, "Oni with an iron club," as a reference to something made undefeatable when the right tool is used. Any considerably evil or cruel man may become an Oni. After death, the souls of the intensely wicked find their way to Naraka, or the hell realm of Buddhist theology. The truly evil among them find themselves in the service of Emna, who is the lord and ruler of Naraka. These souls are transformed into Oni, they're given their mighty iron clubs and then are instructed to deal out punishment to the lesser souls of Naraka. Oni crush the bones of these tormented souls. They flay the skin off of their victims and torture them with many other horrific and unspeakable acts. Naraka is filled with Oni, and these bloodthirsty creatures make up the legions and armies of Hell's generals. It is possible for an Oni transformation to take place in the living realm. It is in fact these Oni who are spoken of the most in legends and folklore, as they are obviously the most dangerous. Should a man be so evil that it is impossible for him to find any redemption in life, he immediately becomes an Oni and terrorizes the living. One famous tale tells of a man named Shoten Doji, a monk in training and suspected child of a demon who attempted to prank townsfolk at a festival. He wore the mask of an Oni and leapt from the darkness to scare them, but afterwards found he could not remove the mask. Shoten Doji sought the help from the abbot of his temple, who scolded him for his wickedness. His peers then mocked him for his ugliness, making his heart become evil and full of rage, like an Oni. Shoten Doji moved into the mountains, where he practiced dark magic and became more powerful every passing day. He kidnapped men and women to drink their blood and eat their organs. His growing power attracted followers to him, who also became Oni. Shoten Doji swore vengeance on everyone, and ordered his followers to attack the capital with ever-increasing frequency. The emperor was troubled by these attacks. He ordered his bravest warrior, Raiko, and his men to climb the mountain where the Oni lived and bring him back Shoten Doji's head. After Raiko eventually sliced off his prize, the head was said to still viciously bite at anybody who came nearby. This forced the warrior to bury the head outside of the city to stop it from causing trouble. The origin of the word Oni finds its roots in China, where its character derives from the term to hide or to conceal. It was originally used to signify any spirit or ghost-like entity. Quite importantly, it didn't explicitly represent something evil. Indeed, the modern-day character for Oni in China still has the same spiritual connotation. The concept of Oni seems to have been absorbed by Buddhism at some point in the past, and has over time evolved into the creatures that they are currently represented as. Modern-day Japan still has celebrations related to Oni. Perhaps most famously is the custom of Mami-maki during the annual Setsubun festival. Setsubun takes place on February 3rd every year, just before spring, and it's kind of a pseudo New Year's Eve. The festival revolves around cleansing evil from the year behind, and driving away evil and disease for the year to come. Mami-maki sees one member of the family wearing the mask of an Oni. The rest of the family cast roasted soybeans at them, yelling "Evil out, look in," just before slamming the front door in their face. That's it, thanks for watching. Thanks for liking and subscribing to the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. If you're new to us here at Aspect History, why not check out some of our other content linked right here. You can keep up to date with the latest happenings on Facebook and Discord. I'm Circle Strafe, and we'll see you in the next video. Toodles!
Okay, so like we mentioned with the Bake-kujira's classification as a bakemono, we should probably talk about the Oni's classification as a yokai, and what a yokai actually is. So the word is actually built from two different characters, and yo can be used as either attractive, bewitching, or calamity, like we mentioned in the video, and kai can be used for mystery or wonder. And yokais are kind of unique in that they encompass demons, gods, or kami. They encompass spirit possession or tsukimono, and even just like urban legends and strange happenings all fall under the banner of yokai. Yokai also encompass all bakemono, including the Bake-kujira. The Bake-kujira is a bakemono, and by definition it is a yokai. The yokai classification actually started out in the Edo period of Japan, and what happened at the time was that ghost stories and supernatural tales from rural regions of Japan started to kind of come together. People traveled a lot more. People found themselves with contacts in more distant regions, and they started learning more about each other. And eventually you had people like Toriyama Saiken, who essentially collected different local traditions, different stories, and created a bestiary of artwork and of scrolls. And so this is kind of where yokai spawned out of. Okay, so the next video we've got for you is Ragnar Lothbrok and the Dragons. This one as well is voiced over by Steel Stash, so prepare for change in voice.
Out in the world, there is said to be a king. This king is a ruthless killer of every living thing that crosses its path. Tales of it exist in various forms and many cultures.
Okay, so maybe not. Just give me 1 second.
Place. We know it as the basilisk. The basilisk is a murderous creature with deadly capabilities. In Latin, its name is
Ragnar
Regulus,
Lothbrok,
in Greek
Viking legend
Basiliscus,
or historical
and in
figure.
French Basilisk.
Historians debate
The
to his
name it
actual
carries-
existence, but Ragnar's name
Because it is
repeatedly
seen-
Sorry, just give me 1 second. I'm not sure what's going on with the video's feed at the minute. It's just gone a bit nuts.
Ragnar Lothbrok.
The form of a basilisk is different depending on origin. In some versions, it is a giant snake, and in others, a small, crown-crested snake. In some cultures, the basilisk is a rooster with a serpent tail.
Okay, so we'll go on break for a couple of minutes while I try and figure out what's going on. I will catch you in a couple of seconds.
Each of these representations have their own quirks and peculiarities, but they all generally conform to one or more of the following rules.
Ragnar Lothbrok, Viking legend or historical figure. Historians debate to his actual existence, but Ragnar's name repeatedly shows up in some of the biggest turning points of Scandinavian history. He appears as a ruler, a raider, and if the following story is to be believed, a dragon slayer. As far as dragon myths go, one of the more obscure revolves around Ragnar Lothbrok. Before we begin, let's just take a little moment to talk about Viking names. Surnames were, and still are, an important piece of information when trying to identify someone. In Western cultures today, we usually have a familial name, which we pass down to our children and have inherited from our parents. However, during the times in which these men of the North pillaged and invaded Europe, surnames were not inherited. they were chosen. Viking surnames were uniquely obtained based on the traits and appearances of the person they applied to. This basically means that fathers would have different surnames to their sons and grandsons. At the time, it would be quite common to come across another man named Ragnar in the 10th century Denmark. To make a person more easily identifiable in a group, names would be given to people along the lines of Forkbeard or Bloodaxe or anything else to make them stand apart. One common solution to the surname problem was to name someone based on the name of their father. As an example, the son of Ragnar Lothbrok, Bjorn Ironside, had a son named Eric Bjornsson. This trait can still be seen in many modern-day Scandinavian surnames. But what about Lothbrok? Where did that come from? The little information we have about Ragnar was that he was likely the son of a king named Sigurd. So why wasn't he named Sigurdsson? Lothbrok, quite hilariously, means shaggy breeches or fuzzy pants. The name refers to the key plot point of one of his adventures, which we'll go over now. Harald, the king of the Swedes, goes hunting in the wooded areas of his land. On his hunt, he happens to come across 2 young snakes. The king inexplicably decides to take the snakes home with him as a gift for his daughter Thora. He tells his daughter to protect the snakes, to feed them, and raise them as best she can. Thora rears them well and they grow speedily in her care to maturity. The snakes are given an entire ox to eat every day. Eventually, the snakes begin to cause havoc to the surrounding areas of King Harald's land. Thora has raised them so well that they have grown to enormity. The snakes break free of their bonds and besiege the land with their terrible poisonous breath. King Harald decrees that any man who is able to take care of this problem for him are permitted to marry his beautiful daughter. This statement, unsurprisingly, draws in men from many lands, attracted by their desire for the king's daughter or for the fame their victory will bring them. Ragnar had just divorced his wife Lagertha. He hasn't trusted her for a while, especially after she set deadly beasts on him. He hears of the challenge of the 2 serpents from travelers and passers-by and is intrigued to try his luck. Ragnar is aware of the traits and of the abilities of the gigantic snakes, and seeks assistance from his nurse to help him prepare for the challenge. He instructs his nurse to provide him with thick wool, tar, and sand to pad his breeches. Ragnar jumps into some icy water whilst covered in his cladding. He climbs out and then waits for his clothes to freeze in the wintry air, turning them into a kind of makeshift fuzzy armor. Ragnar straps his spear to his hand and with the king and the king's courtiers in tow, heads out to meet the giant serpents. One of the snakes approaches him, and then the other shortly behind the first. They spew their poisonous breath at Ragnar and move in for the kill. The king flees out of cowardice, and his courtiers scream in fear, but Ragnar is unmoved. The snakes strike at Ragnar's legs, and his icy, fuzzy armor protects him. With one arm, he bats the snakes around, and with the other firmly strapped to his spear, he impales them both in their hearts. The king returns to Ragnar. He is overjoyed and is merrily laughing at Ragnar's unconventional appearance. He names Ragnar as Ragnar Lothbrok in honor of his ridiculous attire. Ragnar then marries Thora, the prize of his efforts. That's it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for liking and subscribing up until now. It really means a lot to us. If you're new to us, why not check out some of our other videos linked right here. I'm Steel Sash, and I'll see you in the next episode.
Okay, so sorry about that, first of all. I'm not sure what happened to the audio and video there. On my end, it just completely crapped out. I appreciate it probably carried on for you guys, but we're back again anyway. So yeah, that was voiced over by Steel Stash again for Dragon Myths. What I want to add onto that video is probably a bit more history, I guess. So, according to Tales, if you've seen Vikings, you probably know what I'm about to say, because Vikings is quite accurate. So, according to Tales, Ragnar was executed by King Aela of Northumberland in England, probably around 865 AD. He was thrown into a pit of snakes, and if rumour has it, the killing blow was a snake biting him in the eye, which is kind of prophetic, considering one of his children was called Snake in the Eye for a surname. Anyway, his death apparently kicked off a massive invasion of England by something called the Great Heathen Army, and it was led by many hugely important historical Viking figures. Most of them were reputedly sons of Ragnar, actually, so it was kind of vengeance for their dad. And among these were like Bjorn Ironside, Ivar the Boneless, and Ubba. The thing that's interesting about this is that most mythological tales, the most mythological tale of Ragnar deals with him taking out a pair of powerful snakes, and his death was essentially him facing the exact same thing. And I think there's a cruel coincidence in that. Anyway, the next video is about the basilisk. So let's rock on with that.
Ragnar Lothbrok, Viking legend.
Basilisk. Never mind, it's gone crazy again. Give me 1 second to sort that out.
Out in the world, there is said to be a king. This king is a ruthless killer of every living thing that crosses its path. Tales of it exist in various forms and many cultures, and its name changes from place to place. We know it as the basilisk. The basilisk is a murderous creature with deadly capabilities. In Latin, its name is Regulus, in Greek Basiliscus, and in French Basilisk. The name it carries means little king, because it is seen as the ruler of all reptiles. The form of a basilisk is different depending on origin. In some versions it is a giant snake, and in others a small, crown-crested snake. In some cultures, the basilisk is a rooster with a serpent tail, and in others a gigantic lizard. Each of these representations have their own quirks and peculiarities, but they all generally conform to one or more of the following rules. Rule number 1. The basilisk can kill you by looking into your eyes. William Shakespeare once spoke of this power in his play Richard III. The character Anne Neville wishes to have the eyes of a basilisk so as to harm her husband's murderer. Rule number 2. The basilisk is extremely venomous, and the trail of venom in its wake is deadly. The Libyan region of Cyrenaica took this further by stating that upon being slain, the venom of a basilisk is potent simply by being in a man's proximity. Rule number 3. The basilisk can breathe fire. In 79 AD, Pliny the Elder spoke of the basilisk in his text on natural history. He states that the reptilian king can rout other snakes by simply hissing at them. Pliny goes on to say that the basilisk uses its breath to scorch rocks and bushes out of its path. Rule number 4. Weasels and cockerels can kill basilisks. Leonardo da Vinci recognised the weasel's power over the basilisk in his own bestiary. He states that a weasel is immune to the stare of a basilisk and can even survive their deadly venom. Da Vinci continues that the smell of a weasel's urine is so strong that a basilisk cannot survive it. Geoffrey Chaucer The famed author of the Canterbury Tales talks about how the crow of a cockerel turns a basilisk to ash. This ash is then used by alchemists to turn silver to gold, or to assist in the creation of a philosopher's stone. A basilisk comes into being when a cockerel rears the egg of a snake or a toad. Sometimes this is a regular egg, sometimes it's yolkless or peculiarly shaped. Sometimes this egg has been laid by a very specific animal at a very specific age on a very specific date. Regardless, in its most basic form, a basilisk is a chimera of reptile and bird. It is mainly serpent-like on its hind half, with some cockerel-like features at the fore. The basilisk was so feared amongst the peoples of medieval Europe, its chimera image has been adopted by many places to deter away those seeking to invade. The city of Basel in Switzerland is perhaps the most well known for this, with fountains depicting basilisks littering the streets. In one of Basil's chronicles, a tale tells of a cockerel that laid an unusually elongated egg. The people of Basel were so paranoid about the bad omen that a man promptly executed the bird. He discovered 3 more eggs with the cockerel and decided to burn everything he found, with the cockerel's remains. The basilisk is almost identical in its description to another mythical creature, the cockatrice. The cockatrice's birth actually follows the exact opposite process of the basilisk, a cockerel egg reared by a snake or toad. In modern times, the basilisk is synonymous with fantastical giant snakes, and its separation from the cockatrice is quite pronounced. However, the further you go back into history, the more these two beasts intermingle, until they are essentially the same creature. One example of the joined history between the basilisk and the cockatrice is in Old English translations of the Bible and their inability to resolve the differences between the beasts. In Isaiah 14:29, the Revised English Bible says, "Out of the serpent's root shall come forth a basilisk, and his fruit shall be a fiery flying serpent." King James's Bible, at the exact same place, states, "Out of the serpent's root shall come forth a cockatrice, and his fruit shall be a fiery flying serpent." It is clear that the concept of the basilisk has evolved, and still continues to evolve over time. Throughout history, it has been referenced by a remarkable amount of highly respected individuals, all with their own beliefs on how it looks and what abilities it has. We've already spoken about the likes of Chaucer and Da Vinci, and even references in the Bible. The basilisk also shows up in the Zadig by Voltaire as a rare source of medicine for a dying lord. Poets Alexander Pope and Percy Bysshe Shelley reference the basilisk in their own works. Charles Dickens uses the basilisk to describe the character Miggs in Barnaby Rudge, and Bram Stoker uses it to reflect Dracula's signature gaze. Today, the basilisk might appear like the petrifying chamber dweller from J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series. So what exactly is a basilisk? Tracing the sources and evolution of the creature as far back as we can go, the earliest descriptions of the basilisk closely resemble that of the cobra. Pliny the Elder, who we referenced earlier, speaks of how the basilisk enjoys dry sandy climates and is crested on its head with a sigil almost like a diadem. He goes on to talk about how the basilisk slithers around unusually, with part of its body raised in the air. If we were to take this assumption further, many species of cobra are notable for spitting venom. The mongoose, a relative of the weasel, is a known predator of cobras. It is also one of the few animals that is sometimes prefixed with the word king. That's it, thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting us here at Aspect History. We have some competition winners to announce, so if you entered our caption contest a couple of weeks back, stick around to see if you won. Before that, here's a few of our favourite entries. Okay, so we have 3 prizes to give away. Third place goes to Moody Writer. Congratulations, you win an Aspect History t-shirt and some other small channel merch. Second place goes to Thomas Parilak. Nice work, you win an Aspect History t-shirt, some smaller merch, and a snazzy as hell copy of Dante's Inferno. And finally, first place goes to Curtis Lubberts. And to you, dear winner, you win an Aspect History t-shirt, some smaller merch, a snazzy copy of Inferno, a copy of Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology, and the hardest goddamn colouring book on mythical creatures that we've ever seen. Get in touch on the back end of the channel or through our Discord to send over your contact details and we'll get the prizes posted off to you. If you didn't win this time around, we run our competitions pretty regularly, so try again next time. I've been Circle Strafe and I'll see you in the next episode. Toodles!
Okay, so sorry about that again. Don't know what happened to the stream there. There was a question that came in during that video from Thomas Parilak, who just happened to be actually at the end of that video winning some awards. So good for him for watching it again, I guess. I've got a more thorough quote here from Pliny the Elder about the basilisk, and there's quite an important message for it at the end that I don't really talk about in the video. So he says, "It hisses. All the other serpents fly from it, and it does not advance its body like the others by a succession of folds, but moves along upright and erect upon the middle. It destroys all shrubs, not only by its contact, but those even that it has breathed upon. It burns up all the grass too, and breaks the stones. To this dreadful monster, the effluvium of the weasel is fatal, a thing that has been tried with success, for kings have often desired to see its body when killed. So true is it that it has pleased nature that there should be nothing without its antidote." So the crux coming out of that is essentially that Pliny the Elder is saying that although the basilisk is a great evil, there is nothing without a natural cure in nature, which is quite important. Anyway, Thomas Parilak asked a question, and he says, what's the difference between a cockatrice and a basilisk? And in practical terms, nothing really. The only difference between them is that a basilisk is, if I remember rightly, the egg of a cockerel that is being reared by a snake, and a cockatrice is the egg of a snake that is being reared by a cockerel. Or the other way around. That is literally the only difference between them. In the past, there used to be a bigger difference. They used to look a little bit different. They used to be used differently. But over time, because they are so much alike, like we saw with the Bible quotes from the two different versions of the Bible, you can use the names interchangeably and you can pretty much call them the same thing. If somebody tells you about the basilisk, they might actually be talking about a cockatrice, and it'd be very difficult to tell the difference. Anyway, the next video is the kelpie, so let's get on that.
In the lochs and pools of Scotland dwells a spectral horse. This evil horse has magical powers that it uses to ensnare mortal men and women, and few who meet it and survive come out unscathed. Kelpies are aquatic mythical creatures. Their name means colt, or young male horse. They are mystical horses that live within all the lochs, pools and rivers of Scotland. Kelpies are considered so common, in fact, that almost every body of water within Scotland has a kelpie tale associated with it. The motive of these creatures differs depending on the tale, but usually the goal of a kelpie is companionship, murder, or oftentimes both. The kelpies themselves are white or black, and they always have a wet dripping mane, even when on land. They are powerful beasts, 10 times stronger than regular horses, with the stamina of many more than that. When their tails enter water, they deliver a booming roar of thunder, and once submerged, they wail a dying wail to draw in prey. Physical contact with any part of them binds their flesh to the person touching, meaning there is absolutely no escape from a kelpie once fallen into their trap. A kelpie can trick people to climb onto its back and attempt to ride it. It stands looking calm on a water's edge, usually appearing to those that are tired and in need of rest. It can show itself to the sick, the lame, or those simply seeking to cross through shallow water untarnished. Their prey sees a beautiful, abandoned horse, and they approach it hand outstretched to ride. With this, their doom is sealed. With its victim unable to detach from it, the kelpie strides off quickly to deep water and submerges to drown anyone clasped to its back. Some tales tell of it eating its victims and spitting out their entrails onto the shore. Others simply regard that the poor souls are never seen again. A quite famous rendition tells of a group of young boys, sons of chieftains and kings, who all climbed aboard the back of a kelpie at once. One boy managed to escape by cutting off his own fingers before being dragged to the depths. All he heard as the kelpie disappeared was the joyous laughter of the other ignorant boys, still riding on its back. Kelpies are notable for having a number of diverse water-based magical powers. They can sometimes run on top of the water as they carry their victims, or they can raise floods and waves to wash people away to drown. Perhaps the most famed ability of theirs, though, is their aptitude for transformation. The kelpie's ability to transform means that both their motives for companionship or murder can be easily achieved in the form of a human. For companionship specifically, the kelpie can appear as a powerful, lordly-looking man, beautiful and gracious, only distinguishable by seaweed matted in his hair. The creature entices young women with majestic splendour to ensnare them to an unbreakable, often deadly affection. Pete Beresford Ellis, in his book on Celtic myths, goes into further detail with this. He talks about how the kelpie purposefully sheds a tear and asks a young girl to wipe the tear away for him. The touching of the tear becomes a bond of love that entraps the girl. In Ellis's rendition, a kelpie can only remain in human form until the setting of the sun as well, after which it must return to the water as a horse. Seeing the kelpie in its horse form can free the victim from their bonds of attraction, meaning the kelpie must continuously make sure that doesn't happen by leaving for the water before sunset. The power to transform has also led to other ways that the kelpie can murder its prey. The creature can become a brutish, hairy man that kills its victims by crushing them in a vice-like grip before taking them into the water. It can become a beautiful naked woman and trick lusting men into swimming with it, only to drag them to their untimely end. Again, it can become a handsome and powerful young man, but this time for altogether more grisly reasons. Despite the many dangers of the kelpies, there is in fact a way to take command of them. Taking possession of the bridle on a kelpie's back gives the owner command of all kelpies. The MacGregor clan are still rumoured to own such a bridle to this day, taken from a beast long ago. The House of Murphy was said to have been built using an enslaved kelpie, and indeed many other Scottish castles supposedly share a similar history in that regard. However, a warning comes to those who use a kelpie in this manner, that the seat of the clan will be forever cursed. So where does the concept of the kelpies come from? Like the qalupalik, another beast talked about in this video series, it's easy to see how kelpies exist as a cautionary tale for adventurous young children not to get too close to dangerous waters. They could also exist to warn young women about the advances of unknown and mischievous men, or indeed the advances of any unknown stranger feigning kindness. The kelpies are still very much alive in the hearts and minds of Scottish people. This is in no small part thanks to the enormous monuments built for them back in 2013. Me and Stakona had the chance to go and visit them on the tail end of December last year. Pretty incredible. They are, honestly.
I wonder how long it took them to build them.
They're huge.
So you've got like big frames inside as well.
Yeah, there's
Not
some.
just a shell.
Yeah, they've got something in them. You can tell how they put them together.
Yeah.
Bit of sunset going on as well. I love that they look like they're coming out of the water. Yeah. How many stories high would you say these are? Like, how many floors could you fit in a building? Like a horse-shaped building. To close off today's video, here's a poem of warning by Belle Robertson that she wrote in her Scottish bestiary about the dangers of a kelpie. If kelpie gets you by its claw, light a torch, don't touch its fur, don't listen to its screeching cry, and never stare it in the eye. That's it, thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting us here at Aspect History. Why do you think the kelpie first came about? Let us know in the comments. If you're new to us, why not check out some of our other bestiary episodes, linked right here. I've been Circle Strafe, and I'll see you in the next episode. Toodles!
Okay, so that one was about the kelpies, and there was a quite a lot of bad camera work there at the end, so I apologise for that again. One thing that the video doesn't really explain is that there is a difference between kelpies and kelpie, and it's easy to assume that what I'm talking about is kind of like a species of creatures, but sometimes in some stories, kelpie is seen as kind of an individual. It's seen as kind of a singular being that exists and appears and disappears from the living realm, and it's kind of like it's kind of recognized like almost like a supernatural king who occasionally goes to the living world as a horse. And in the Tale of the Sons and the Chieftains, where the kid cut his fingers off to escape, in Ellis's rendition, the kelpie is seen in this regard, and he has a throne, and he has other mythical creatures that are kind of subservient to him. And the story actually ends with this king tricking a rich, confident young princess into being his personal house servant, and she ends up like cleaning his throne and being his slave essentially. And there's also some really interesting stuff that kelpie as an individual can do. There's a really interesting part of one of the stories where the kelpie purposefully performs specific kinds of magic to make it look like there's a human that has kind of mastery over the mystical arts. So this human's doing stuff like, look at what I do if I play with this cauldron. And in the background, kelpie's doing all of this magic to make it look like the human's actually got powers. And the idea is that he's playing, essentially. He finds it amusing that those around this kind of apparent wizard are so amazed by him that they raise him up from this abject poverty and obscurity to a pretty prestigious role, even though he's got no magical powers at all. So there is kind of a difference between kelpies as a species, as kind of like a waterborne species, and kelpie as an actual kind of singular being with intelligence. So that's something to think about as well. The next video we've got is the dullahan, and I think this is the last video. So if you've got any questions you've been saving up, now would be the time to say them, and I can answer them at the end, basically, and we can have a little close-off session. So let's rock on.
The countryside of Ireland is a great evil. It trots atop the back of a black stallion, leaving death in its wake. He is the original headless horseman, the dullahan. In today's video, we're going to be covering the haunting dark terror that is the dullahan. We're going to go over what he looks like, what his purpose is, and what his methods are. The dullahan is a spiritual entity from Ireland. He is sometimes seen as a member of the Unseelie fairies, dark beings of malevolence and evil. The dullahan is also closely associated with the Celtic god of fertility, Crom Dubh, or Dark Crooked One. In Celtic history, sacrifice by decapitation was a common gift to this god. The dullahan is recognizable as a headless figure, wrapped in a black cloak which flows and curls like smoke. He rides atop a perfect and sometimes headless stallion and exists solely to hunt for innocent dying souls.
The dullahan carries his own head with him, riding around in search of his victims. His head is covered in rotting flesh and gives off a pungent odor of cheese and sour stale dough. On his disgusting, half-melted face, his mouth is split across to form the appearance of a disturbing smile. The smile is a show of terror to his victims that he enjoys what he does. The horseman is equipped with a terrible whip formed from the spine of a human. He uses it to beat a stallion when the hunt has begun. It is also said that he carries with him objects of death, such as candles concealed inside of skulls. To hunt, Dullahan lifts his own detached head high in the sky and peers out far into the fog of night. His powerful eyes dash back and forth rapidly, piercing land, wood, and stone. When he spots his victim, it is already too late for them. Dullahan speeds across the dark moonlit lands, his horse moving so quickly that flames emanate from its floor-striking hooves. Any gate in the Dullahan's path crashes open instantly to let him pass. All the victims know of his or her demise is the loud trotting of a horse coming to a stop. Their souls are then torn from their bodies at the mention of their name by the Dullahan. For those that see the Dullahan but are not his target, peering on him as he rides brings with it a harsh punishment. Seeing his form can be met with a bucket of foul human blood thrown into their faces. Worse still, sometimes their eyes are plucked from their skulls by the horrific spinal whip that the Dullahan carries. Despite his almost undefeatable power, there is a defense against the Dullahan. The Dullahan is deathly afraid of gold. One famous tale tells of an elderly man walking a dark path through woodlands at night. In the far distance, this man hears the loud trotting of a horse stampeding its way in his direction. He is an old man, but he runs faster than he has ever run, fearing the Dullahan is coming to end his long life. The old man drops a gold coin onto the floor in his wake. Moments later, he hears a loud screeching noise and then turns to see nothing chasing him in the now silent woods. Dullahan is sometimes seen as the coachman of the dreaded Kostebodhar, or silent coach. This coach is a vehicle and omen of death that flies out of the air and across the landscape. The coach itself is sometimes depicted as being made entirely of human thigh bones and rotting flesh. It appears much like a funerary vehicle, and to that effect on the back of it is a black coffin. The Kostebodhar is pulled by 4 to 6 black horses, who move so quickly that flames fly from their hooves and scorch the landscape. These horses can show up with skeleton-like heads that have candles lit behind their eye holes. They are struck incessantly by the Dullahan's spinal whips. The coach is a transport of the dead summoned by the distant wailing of a banshee, and when it is called to the living world, it must leave with a human soul on board. For this reason, any coach thought to be driven by the Dullahan is usually given special passage through all gates and doors, lest it stop and decide to take someone else instead. One story of the Kostebodhar speaks of a servant of the McNamara family who heard the rumbling wheels of a coach in the dead of night. Fearing the oncoming death of the Dullahan, the poor servant scrambled to open 3 gates. He then threw himself into a ball on the ground to avoid seeing and being seen by the Dullahan. The chariot passed him by with no bother, but he waited prone until its rumbling in the distance could no longer be heard. As to the origins of this fascinating being, the first inklings of the Dullahan likely sprang from Christianity coming to Ireland in the 6th century. When Scottish missionaries started to convince the Irish people to turn away from human sacrifice, the Dullahan appeared in Irish consciousness. The god he represented was said to have sprung forth in order to claim his toll of souls when the decapitations in his name came to an end. In the start, this was in the form of For Dorocha, or Dark Man, but eventually this became the creature we now call the Dullahan. More to this, the Dullahan is said to appear mostly on the nights of Irish feast days. Specifically, he shows up on the feast days associated with the god Crom Dubh around August and September. That's it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for liking and subscribing to us. It really means a lot. If you're new to this channel, why not check out some of the other videos linked right here. I'm Steel Stash, and I'll see you next episode. Toodles!
Okay, so that was the last segment of our little adventure. Just to close off that last video, I guess, I would say from that video we know pretty much everything we can know about the dullahan. But just to expand, I figure the best thing to do would be to branch out a little bit and talk about the Headless Horseman in the US and where that might have actually come from. Obviously, the dullahan's a little bit older. The Headless Horseman was something like 1880s or something that the book was written about that. So the story of the Headless Horseman in the US comes from the Legend of Sleepy Hollow by a guy called Washington Irving. And it tells the story of a very unfortunate man named Ichabod Crane and his unnatural rendezvous with a headless stalker of the night. And at the end, he basically goes missing. Irving, the writer, apparently got his idea from the story whilst visiting the UK, actually. So he came to Birmingham, and at the time there were multiple different versions of kind of supernatural hunters in Europe. So as well as just the dullahan, there's the Wild Huntsman from Germany, which is quite a famous German tale of a horseman that hunts innocent people at night. There's a poem called Tam O'Shanter by a famous Scottish poet called Robert Burns, and one of the main characters in that gets chased by a very strange devil-like creature. So this was a common theme at the time. There were a lot of stories that had these kind of mystical hunters that chased after innocent people at night, and it's very easy to see how Washington Irving was inspired by these. Something that's quite interesting about it is that, and maybe just as a coincidence, the Legend of Sleepy Hollow is commonly a tale that you will tell on Halloween. And if you've seen our Halloween video, you would know that it's a celebration with roots in Celtic celebrations to mark the start of winter. And in the video we just watched, Dullahan was based on Crom Dubh, and the celebration from Crom Dubh marked the start of autumn. So it's probably coincidental, but it's just interesting to note that the Headless Horseman is a thing that's celebrated on Halloween, and the dullahan is something that's celebrated on the celebration of Crom Dubh, which are seasonal start of the seasonal celebrations. Okay, anyway, that's the last video in the series. We're about 2 hours in now. If you've got any questions, let me know now, and I can go through them, and we can discuss anything that you'd like to talk about. Some of you guys come from day to day, come from week to week, should I say. So if you've got any comments about whether this stream can be improved, whether the format can be improved, whether there's anything I can add to it to make it a little bit better, comment here, or feel free to comment when the video's on the actual channel. This will go out and this will get stored against the channel. If there's anything burning you want to ask about the channel, you can ask that now, or you can ask that in the comments, or you can send me a private message if you wanted to. Tomorrow, you're probably watching this tomorrow. If you're not watching it tomorrow, then you're watching it some other time. Mermaids is being released, so that's the 14th Mythical Creatures video, and it kind of, it's almost like Selkies Part 2, in that the formatting is very, very similar, and Selkies do play a big part of the mermaid video. But that's coming out tomorrow. That's going to be premiering at 6:45 p.m. I think GMT, which is something like 12 p.m. EST, I think. So yeah, that'll be premiering, and we can watch that together if you want to jump in with that. Yeah, I mean, I guess if there's any questions while I'm still here, we've been going for 2 hours. I think I've covered quite a lot. There was a few questions that came up while I was, to myself, I guess, while I was doing the videos. One of them I kind of covered, especially with the Medusa one. There was a bit towards the end of the Medusa one where in my head I was thinking, what actually happened to the other two Gorgons? And it, I tried to answer that the best way I could. yeah, I guess I'll leave it to you guys to think up some questions or anything for the next 5 minutes. I'll keep the stream going for the next 5-10 minutes, and then we'll just call it a day and clock off. Okay, so a couple of questions are coming in. How many people on your YouTube team to help in these videos? So it all started off with me back in May last year. It was me, and then Metasoma and Steel Stash joined in, and they did some voiceovers for Dante, and you can probably hear Steel Stash quite a lot doing the voices of everyone that isn't Virgil, basically, in Dante's Inferno. Then we had an on and off Irish girl that wanted to do some voiceover, but she couldn't get a good recording setup going, so I'm not sure what happened with that. My fiance actually does the ancient Egypt stuff, so that's 4 of us. We've just had a new artist start working with us, basically, to do a piece of artwork for every one of our videos. And you'll see his first one actually tomorrow. Well, see her first one tomorrow. Just Freudian slip there. So I guess that makes, 5 of us now. Actively looking for more as well, actually. You probably might have noticed it from the community tab on the channel, but we're looking specifically for people to help with translations and captions, because they're quite tedious tasks, and we've got 40 videos to go through in the next couple of weeks, so any help that people can provide with that's a good thing. Always open to new artists. At the minute, Metasoma's taking some time off for personal reasons. I'll try not to go into that. And I guess look for an editor as well. I mean, at the minute it's me doing all of the writing, recording, and editing. Steel Stash is in the military, and he's kind of moving about a little bit at the minute, so he's kind of off for a few weeks as well. So for now, it's just little old me, and I'm trying to get my fiance to do another Ancient Egypt episode as well, to kind of mix it up a little bit. So yeah, 5 of us, I think. Potential for 6 in the near future, and caption guys and stuff and translators, that could blow up. You could have one guy that's doing Portuguese, one guy that's doing Spanish. There's no limit really. I think if that's everything, I guess we'll call it quits there. My video feed seems to have paused itself on whatever's going on with that video input, so it's ended at just the right time. Yeah, I guess I will see you all probably not next week. We've got 2 weeks break for the channel to do some captioning stuff. and try and get ahead with the production a little bit. I'm not sure if that's going to affect the stream or not. I haven't really decided yet. It just kind of depends on how that goes. So you'll get mermaids tomorrow. There won't be new videos, I guess, for a couple of weeks, but there might be a stream maybe next week, maybe the week after. But there'll still be the daily kind of community posts. And, you know, I've got to plug, I guess, the Instagram. The Instagram is the community post, but on a more kind of accessible format. That's kind of blowing up as well, actually, a little bit. It's kind of crazy. I've got another Instagram, which is kind of a personal one, and I've been doing that one for 3 years, and that's got 100 and something followers. And I've been running the Aspect History one for about a week and a half, and it's got like 100 already. So that's doing really, really well at the minute. And I've got to plug the Patreon as well. So people on Patreon that $5 patrons have had access to the mermaid video for 2 days already. They've had access to the scripts. They've had access to an audio-only podcast version, which has got an RSS feed. So they subscribe to the RSS feed. They'll get any of the audio releases we do. We're going to be attempting to do some kind of podcast. We'll see how that goes. And if there is a podcast, the full thing would be on Patreon, and there would be kind of snippets that we'd pull into the YouTube channel. And we're very, very close to YouTube monetization now, so maybe in a few weeks you might start seeing adverts before the videos start, but that's ways off yet. So yeah, if you've got any more questions or anything, just feel free to shove them in the comments when this is done, and we'll close it off there. So thank you everyone for coming along. I hope you learned something today. Hope it was a little bit extra on top of the mythical creatures videos if you've seen them already, and I guess I'll see you when I see you. Toodles!